We're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Natalie Orslin. I'm a staff member here at UChicago Alumni, working with our career programs team, and you are joining us during our Mind Your Career webinar, our series aimed at helping find growth and success in whatever career stage you are in. Today's session is entitled Intentional Experimentation, Designing a Life and a Career That Means Something to You. It can be easy to follow others down the path of least resistance when it comes to your career or worrying about what we should do, and forget about designing a life and a career around what we want to do. I'm excited today to introduce Rupal Patel, who will be helping us design this career. Rupal is a 2005 graduate of Paris, where she earned her MPP. Her career has taken her down several different paths, first as an analyst and a field agent in the CIA, where she has served across the world in active war zones and advised commanding generals. After leaving the CIA with several medals and meritorious citations, Rupal traded in the war room for the boardroom. She earned her MBA at the London Business School and began her first business venture, a real estate investment and development group. As a CEO, a leadership advisor, a coach, and a mentor, she now has the opportunity to support founders and leaders as they find their path to success. She released her first book this year, From CIA to CEO, that shares her advice and a toolkit on how to do that for yourself. We're excited for her to join us for today. Before I hand it over, if you have any questions, please feel free to make use of the chat. We're going to save some time at the end for Q&A, but also if you have anything in the meantime, in the middle, please feel free to jump away and see if we can help you in the middle. Rupal, thank you so much for being here today. I will let you take it away.
Amazing. Thank you, Natalie. It is a pleasure, as always, to be back, even in virtual form with the Chicago community. And as Natalie shared, while I'm going through what I've prepared for this evening, as questions come to you, please feel free to put them in the chat. If I can answer them in the moment, and it's a quick one, I will be very happy to answer it in the moment. But ideally, we leave all the questions for the end. But as they come to you, please do put them in the chat so that you don't forget and scramble at the end to try to remember what it is that you wanted to ask. I've left plenty of time for questions. So if you do have, something that you're really burning to ask, please don't be shy and do put it in the chat. So as Natalie said, I've taken a slightly unconventional career path after I left Chicago, starting at the CIA and then becoming the CEO of my own companies, and now doing a lot of advisory work and consultancy work, both for corporate organizations and executives, as well as early to late stage founders in startups. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a background about my story. And as with everything I share, please, the intention here is to give you some inspiration and ideas. It's not to necessarily tell you what the right thing is or the wrong thing is, because sadly, I don't know every single one of you personally, and you're all coming here with a different perspective, a different background, different goals and ambitions, and different questions about sort of what happens from here, both in your personal as well as your professional lives. And so take what works for you and what resonates, and please ignore all of the rest. This is not, me sort of talking at you and telling you there's one way of doing anything. But like I said, take what resonates and try to find a way to adapt it in a way that is relevant for your circumstances. So just a bit of a background about me and why I'm here and why I do what I do. Perhaps like some of you in the audience, I grew up in an immigrant household. So both of my parents are from India, and I was born and raised in New York. And we had that somewhat stereotypical interaction when I was growing up, where anytime I, as many of us Chicagoans are, I was a straight A plus student. But anytime I would come home from school and I would get, let's say, 98 out of 100 on a test, the question would inevitably be, what happened to the other 2 points, right? Some of you might be nodding your head because this is something you've heard from your own parents. And at the time, I never felt what has often become the bit of the stereotype of like the Asian dragon parents or, helicopter parents. I never felt that there was this obsession with perfection, that they were always driving me too hard and that my best was never good enough. Actually, the way it was sort of communicated in my family and the way I interpreted and internalized that question was less about perfection and more about what could I have done better. is there something I could have done to make, that prepared better or studied harder, or, was I just letting myself down? Did I take an easy way out? And did I leave those 2 points on the table when I actually still had it in me? Now, again, like I said, it wasn't this obsession with perfection and always saying, oh, well, only 100 is something we'll accept. It was that idea of challenging myself to question myself and push myself and see what I was made of and see, am I letting myself down, or was that 98 literally all that I could do? And, did I bring everything to that exam or to that test? The other thing that I grew up around was this idea that we should never get comfortable. So, both of my parents were trained as doctors and practiced doctors, and my mom in her 70s is still a practicing physician. But there was always this ethos of setting ourselves new challenges, not getting comfortable, not becoming complacent, and always, again, seeing what we were made of, testing ourselves in different ways. And as I said, by profession, they were both doctors, but by temperament and by training, by self-learning, they could have done dozens of other things. And there's idea of learning and exploring and being interested and engaged with the world and our place in it, and how we find ourselves in it and fit in it by challenging ourselves and testing ourselves in new ways, was something that I loved about the sort of environment in which I grew up, and that I internalized, and as I said, then brought into my career as as a grown-up, as an adult. So as mentioned earlier, I did spend the first half of my career at the CIA, and I did some really, really exciting work. I served in active war zones and did win war zone service medals for my time while I was out in Afghanistan advising the commanding general of US and international forces. I worked under a few different directors. So that's with me with Director Panetta before he retired. And then I effectively retired soon after transitioning the new director at the time, who was then General Petraeus. And that's me, like all good foreign policy nerds, having my 5 seconds of fame on C-SPAN. But it was while I was at the agency, while I was living this really fast-paced, really intense life, traveling, doing really interesting things, working on things that I was both intellectually interested in, but also sort of philosophically interested in, and foreign policy questions that were really, really important at the time. I found myself again that I started to feel a little bit itchy or twitchy. However, and again, I don't know if any of you have felt that way, but I felt like I was riding this high at the agency and I had done amazing, really meaningful work, but it was starting to feel comfortable. And I just don't like being comfortable. I don't like that sense of like, oh, I could do this with my eyes closed or in my sleep. I like I shared earlier, grew up in this environment where challenge and testing yourself and seeing how you could push yourself in new directions and in different ways and learning different things was always a part of my surroundings. And that really, really did affect the way I sort of charted my career. And so, as I said, I spent the first half of my career, or my professional career at the agency, but started to feel like, oh, is there something else out there? Should I be starting to look for a new test, a new challenge? And that's when I took the leap and moved to London. And initially it was to go to business school, because again, like all good nerds, I do find it's really important for me anyway, to really understand the foundations of what I'm doing. So leaving a totally different world behind, foreign policy, CIA, intelligence, et cetera, and jumping into the world of the private sector didn't feel like a natural transition for me. I wanted to speak the language of business, to understand the concepts and the fundamentals before I decided to do anything in the sort of corporate world. And so once I left LBS, I started my first business, which is, as Natalie mentioned, a real estate investment and development group, and then started a consultancy practice where I work with executives and high performers in more corporate environments. And now I've started doing, speaking around the world at different stages at global conferences, and then published my book back in May, and it's actually releasing in the US next May, so keep an eye out for it. Those of you who are still in the US, it's coming your way in about 6 months. And while all of this sounds really exciting, perhaps, and like it was a straight line trajectory, just went from one amazing thing to another, to another, to another, the reality is far more complicated than that, right? So here's the story behind the story. There were tons of hurdles, both internal and external, that I confronted along the way. Again, as many of you, I don't know, what stage of your careers are, but for many of us at every stage of our careers and our lives, even, there will be some big and small challenges. And for me, again, whenever I share my story or anything, I think it's really important to talk about the less sexy stuff, the things that people don't always want to admit that they had to overcome or confronted, because that is the reality. There is no success, there is no fulfillment, there is no designing a life that's important to you without some challenges and some difficult conversations and difficult things that you have to overcome or find your way around. So first, there were the external ones. As I shared earlier, I'm used to getting straight A's. I am that sort of typical, stereotypical nerd, love school, and I've always done really, really well at it. And it wasn't until I went to get my MBA that I failed my first exam. Not just got a B or even a C, but actually failed. I failed, I think it was management accounting or maybe financial accounting. I don't even remember at this point. And the beautiful thing about that was, at first it was a bit of a shock because I'm not the type of person who fails at school, much less anything else. But secondly, the reality was, the whole world didn't open up and swallow me or fall apart at the seams because I had failed an exam. The reality was, I failed the exam, studied even harder for it the next time, and then passed it the second time around. And that's true for us. That sort of the general principle there is true in so many aspects of life. Sometimes we'll be sailing along, things will be growing great, and we just get used to a certain level of performance or success or whatever it is. And then out of the blue, totally unexpectedly, something will happen. We'll fail, we'll face a hurdle, a challenge, or something that is an experience we're not used to. And we somehow survive it, right? Like I said, the world didn't open up and swallow me whole because I failed a test. I picked myself up, I studied harder, and I passed the second time around. And that is true for all of us. No matter what happens, the way we respond to it, there is a response, and we can either choose to curl up into a ball and quit and decide we're going to throw in the towel, or we just decide that we're going to do what we can do and move on and make, lemons or lemonade out of lemons, as it were. And then there was the interviewing process. When I went to get my MBA, I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to do the whole MBA thing. I'm going to, go and apply to be a consultant. And this is all, everybody was saying, oh, it makes so much sense from your, given your analytical background, and you're used to, distilling huge amounts of data and then presenting it to people. And, it's a natural transition. You'd be perfect for consulting. But I hated consulting. And this is not a dig at consultants, because it's, people who are consultants are doing important work, but it wasn't for me. And every time I would go into one of those case interviews, I just felt that tension of like, oh, I'm having to fake this harder than I've had to fake anything else in my life, faking the enthusiasm, faking the interest, faking all of it. And it was really, really hard, because all of a sudden I was like, shit, if this doesn't feel right, if this is something that I thought was the natural transition from working at the CIA to going into the corporate world, and now this is taken off the table, or I decide to take it off the table as an option, then what the hell does that mean? Where do I go from here? Well, where I went from there was I started a business. And again, it wasn't this straight line, easy thing like, oh, one day I decided I wasn't going to, work at, Bain or McKinsey or whatever. And the next day I started a business. But the process eventually led to me in my second year of at LBS to starting a business. And again, that was something where I totally just jumped into the deep end without having any experience, any understanding of what it would entail. What does it mean to start a business? And it's all of the specifics around, incorporation and the admin and getting set up, legally and with the accounting. But it's also the bigger picture stuff of like, well, what am I building here? And how do I go about building it? What are the steps that I need to take to start from where I'm at, which is zero and nothing, and to actually growing doing a business that will be able to provide me a livelihood and an income at some point. And again, the hurdles felt like they were coming thick and fast. So there was, all of the figuring out of the stuff. And then there were market challenges, there were investor challenges, there were challenges in, everything that I was doing. And it wasn't this easy, nice little sort of straight line from, having an MBA to starting a successful business overnight. And then there's what I like to jokingly now refer to as my family intervention. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I've had a few different times in my life experiences where people who love me, people who care about me, people who know me are very well-meaning and well-intentioned, and they will try to save me from myself. So or they think they're saving me from myself. So in this instance, when I told my family that I wasn't going to go and get a corporate job after my MBA and I was going to start my own business, my sister and brother, one who is a corporate lawyer, the other one who works in private equity, quite literally sat me down and staged effectively what I like to refer to as an intervention. And they said, listen, you have just graduated from a really great business school. You've got this degree on your resume. Don't waste this opportunity to go and get another, impressive credential on your CV. So go get a job at a big company, a big brand name, and don't throw away this chance that you've been given. And that was really hard to hear because, of course, I had my own doubts, right? Here I am having zero background in business or any sort of private sector world. I've got an MBA now, and I'm starting a business in a new country, in a new industry with something totally unrelated to anything I've ever done before. And then my family is, sort of basically calling me out and saying, look, this is probably, or we think this is a bad idea. And that, again, if any of you have been in that position where you've wanted to do something or you've thought about doing something different and taking a slightly different path or an unconventional path, and people around you are basically sort of verbalizing some of the doubts that you've got for yourself, and it's hard to always quiet those voices because they're just echoing what you're probably telling yourself as well. And then there were, of course, those internal hurdles, right? So that voice in your own head that says, well, this is really risky. This is really dangerous. This is crazy. Nobody's done this before. Or, who do you think you are to do something like this? Or, you've got no experience. You've got, you don't have the background or whatever it is that it might sound like or look like for you. But I imagine some, maybe not all, but some of you have that voice in your own head that's like, oh, this is a bit risky or don't do this thing. And it was a real shift for me in going from having, big names on my resume, LBS and the CIA and things that people had registered and recognized and knew about, to all of a sudden being the founder of a business that no one had heard of because I had just started it and it had no track record. And it had no success yet, right? In the early days, I had literally nothing to sort of hang my pride on because I couldn't point to anything and have anything to show for what I was doing. And that decoupling of my identity from what I was doing or who I was affiliated with or the institution I was a part of was a really, really hard thing to have to go through. And then, of course, there was the sort of my, in the face of all of the challenges, as I was building a business and as I had all of this noise coming at me from inside and outside, again, it was a lot of stuff to be constantly managing, both mentally and emotionally. There was also the loneliness because I had gone from, working in an office environment or working in the field when I was at the agency to working, to being an MBA student and having this really lively social environment around me, to quite literally sitting in my home office all day, every day by myself. And that loneliness is something that not enough, I think, founders really talk about, or at least didn't at the time. This is back now in 2012, 2013. And it's really, really hard, especially for somebody like me who is introverted, but is also, I guess, sort of an extroverted introvert. I need the interaction, I need the background noise, I need the banter and the sort of bouncing ideas off of other people. And that was really hard to get used to. And then, of course, there were all of the sacrifices. So while all of my post-MBA friends were off, going to Tenerife for the weekend or living these really exciting lives, traveling here, there, and everywhere for their jobs, I was having to say no to everything, no to dinners, no to travel, no to anything that was going to mean that I couldn't invest that time or money in my business. Because in the early stages, when I was bootstrapping and funding my business, I was living off savings, and every spare penny I had, either I had to put towards my living expenses or towards building my business. And it got really hard to keep saying no to dinner invitations, or let's go out for this, like I said, a weekend away or whatever it was. We get used to lifestyles, and then the sacrifices that are required by changing that lifestyle and pursuing our dreams or our ambitions can sometimes be a really difficult thing to do. And then there was all of the fear, right? What if I do screw up? What if this does go nowhere? What if all of the warnings and the sky is falling predictions that people were trying to sort of put on me, what if they actually came true? There was a lot to just be parsing through as I made this transition that many people just didn't understand. But here's what I learned along the way. And here's where hopefully some of this will come alive for you based on where you're at, both in your careers and with where you want to go next. It's so important to curate your inputs. And by this, I mean quite literally everything that you are letting into your headspace. Because no matter how big or small, every single input leaves an imprint. Like I said, it might be big or small, but it leaves an imprint. So the books you're reading, the podcasts you listen to, the people you surround yourself with, the conversations you're having, all of those have an impact. And I've referred to them as I've referred to the people element of that as your ops team, right? Because so often in life, we've got our friends, we've got our colleagues, and we think, okay, well, they're the same people who've been with me forever are going to be with me on the next part of my journey. But that's not always the case, because if you are making a pivot, if you are making a change, if in my case, I was moving from, a very structured environment into a totally unstructured environment, the people that I could rely on in one are not going to be the same that I can rely on in another. And so I had to very consciously create a new network of people around me who were other founders in real estate and in property, people who were a few stages ahead of where I was in the same industry, or people who had a similar vision or similar ambitions of, doing their own thing or whatever it was. But I couldn't just fall back on the same people that I was hanging out with before, because my life had changed and what I was doing had changed. And I needed to make sure that who I was bringing with me, or who I was asking to come along with me on that journey, changed along with it to make it so that they were the right people for that phase of my life. It doesn't mean that I cut everybody else out. It just meant that I was very careful about whose advice, for example, I was now taking. So I was ignoring people who loved me, family members who were always, hey, you should just apply for a job, or just, send your resume out to this thing. I had to tune all of them out and surround myself with people who were like, hey, this is how you can grow a business. The people who had actual lived experience of building a business from scratch and growing it in a meaningful way, and people who had made a similar unconventional pivot. Because that's the thing is, not everybody will have an opinion, but not everybody's opinion is equally valid. So if you are looking to make a shift, don't ask people for advice who've not made that shift. If you're looking to go from, I don't know, startup to corporate, or corporate to startup, or whatever your change or your evolution looks like, you have to ask people who have done it themselves, who have the relevant experience, and also people whose values are in alignment with your values. Because there's no sense in asking people for advice if they just don't know what they're talking about. My brother and sister are brilliant humans and both very good at what they do in PE and in corporate law, but they had no experience in starting a business. So no matter how smart they were in their specific fields, their expertise was not relevant for what I was doing. So of course I shouldn't listen to their advice, just as they shouldn't listen to me when they're talking about their careers and their career progression, because I know nothing about the inside workings of corporate law, for example. So make sure the people you have around you, the inputs that you are letting into your headspace, are in alignment with, like I said, both your vision, but also your values. Stop shitting all over yourself. And by this, I mean all of those things we tell ourselves about, oh, well, by this age, I should have this much money, or, as a Chicago grad, I should be working in this field, or I should, be this successful, or I should have this title. All of those shoulds are so exhausting. And not always, but a lot of the time, the shoulds that we burden ourselves with are ones that other people have given us, ones that come from family, from peers, from cultural sort of expectations, whatever it is, that might not be relevant for you. So again, as you start thinking about what next or where you want to go, consider where those shoulds are coming from. Are they coming from you and based on what you care about and your values? Or are you telling yourself you should do something or shouldn't do something because that's just somebody else's baggage or somebody else's plan that you've internalized? You can also make it what you want. And this is true about every experience, your career, your relationships, parenthood, whatever it is. We are all so used to looking around us for best practice or for ideas or templates for how things, should pan out or how they should look. But you can make it quite literally anything you want. I am now the CEO of a multi-million pound value business. And I'm also a mother of two who still shops at Primark for my kids. And I used to work at the CIA where I would have to be where I had to get practiced in firing weapons at long distances. And I also cry at Disney movies. And the reason I share these slightly weird examples in this context is because so often we think we have to, like I said, sort of conform to a certain image or a certain way of behaving or a certain set of criteria for how we look, how we dress, how we act. And that's not sustainable if it's not who you are. So you can make your career, make your life, make anything look exactly like you want it to look like without, again, bombarding yourself with the shoulds coming from other people. So I love, for example, my two young daughters to pieces. They are amazing and they mean a lot to me, but they are not my sole reason for existing. My career is just as important to me as my family is. And I acknowledge all of the trade-offs that have to come by making those two things my biggest priorities in life. But I have chosen to make my career and my relationship with my family, for example, what I want it to look like instead of what other people tell me it should look like. And that can only happen if and when you start to find and listen to your inner compass. Again, starting to ask yourself those questions about why do I think I'm doing what I'm doing, and why am I pursuing this career or this industry or whatever it is? Because so few of us ever take that time to pause and reflect and ask ourselves, how did I get here? And why am I still here? And if you're happy, that's great. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if you are feeling that tension or any sort of feeling of like, oh, there's something more out there for me or whatever it is, the answer can, and this is a bit sort of, woo-woo or whatever you want to call it, but the answer can only come if you start looking inwards and start listening to what you care about and what you value instead of what everybody else around you does. And tied to that is this idea of having and living by your life philosophy. Now, this is not something that you can just be like, oh, well, my life philosophy is, blah, 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 right? This will take some time and thought and reflection. But for me, and I can't give you sort of a hard date as to when I chose this as my life philosophy, but I remember from at least in my early 20s, deciding that I was always going to live my life as an adventure. So when the CIA came knocking unexpectedly on my door, I said yes, because that was an adventure. When I was an MBA student and studying in London during the London 2012 Olympics, and they were looking for volunteers, I raised my hand and I volunteered to be in the Olympics instead of getting an internship, which everybody thought was a crazy idea, because I had this philosophy to fall back on. For example, volunteering in London 2012 was going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity. Getting an internship, not a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so for me, it made those tensions, those, crossroads or those decision points that much easier, because I had a bigger picture philosophy that I could fall back on and say, is this the adventure that I want to go on? And it allowed me to then say no very confidently to a lot of other things. So I said no to internships. I said no to working at, another job when I got the offer from the CIA. I said no to all of those very alluring distractions of going out to dinner and on holiday and all of those things, because I was saying yes to other things. I was saying yes to building my own business and to the freedom that would enable me in the future. I was saying yes to doing a once in a lifetime opportunity like being in the Olympics. I was saying yes to who knew what I was entering into when I entered the CIA. And so it's, again, being grown-ups and acknowledging the trade-offs involved in everything, because everything we say no to means we can say yes to something else that is perhaps more meaningful or more important or just more us. And everything we say yes to means we have to say no to something else. We are not, sadly, endowed with infinite time, money, resources, energy, all of those things. And so these trade-offs are really, really important to start being conscious of, because then we can make them thoughtfully instead of feeling like we're constantly just making decisions on the fly. And lastly, it's really important to honor who you are. At this point in our lives, you guys, in our 30s, 40s, 50s, we are effectively who we are going to be. That doesn't mean we can't change the sort of the things that might be damaging us, or our relationships or our careers. We can all sort of change those things if we want to. But at the end of the day, I think it's so important to get really good at also acknowledging and knowing what our strengths are, and then again using that knowledge and that understanding to craft lives, careers, etc., that are in alignment with those strengths and those values, instead of constantly punishing ourselves and trying to work on all of the things that need fixing, all of the developmental areas or all of those so-called weaknesses. At this point in our lives, there are going to be real diminishing returns to any investment in, sort of, like I said, so-called making up for our weaknesses. So just honor who you are at this point. Acknowledge, again, the trade-offs that come from you're never going to be good at X thing, but you are already amazing at this thing. So let's double down on the things that we're amazing at. And again, start being conscious about how we're going to craft and weave those things into our lives and careers on a more regular basis. So to do all of this very, very practically, I'm going to give you some tools that can be adapted in any context and any environment. Hopefully, that you'll start playing around with this and see. But first and foremost is we all have to start getting comfortable with discomfort. Again, for many of us, there comes a time just naturally in our careers or in our lives or with age where we start feeling some of those tensions around, oh, well, why am I here? Or how did I get here? Or, is this career, or is this, I don't know, where I'm living? Is this right for me? Or is this in alignment with our values? And it's okay for us to start asking ourselves those questions, because it's probably going to be more uncomfortable to not answer those questions than it is to grapple with them. And whether it's in answering those questions or just facing the uncertainty that comes with, well, I know I don't want to do what I'm doing now, but I don't know what the next thing looks like. That's okay. That is just sadly a part of life and part of the process of growth and evolution. And like I said, living more in alignment with what you care about. But while sort of, getting comfortable with this idea that, this will be uncomfortable if you start challenging things and asking, sort of bigger questions, there's always going to be opportunity there. Opportunity for you to uncover things about yourself that may have been hidden, passions or skills or, interests that you might not have realized were there, or just meeting different people. Who knows? But the thing is, you don't know if you just stay close to, oh, well, I know this thing and it's comfortable and I'm going to stay here forever, even if it makes me unhappy. Just acknowledge and accept blindly, if you need to, that there will be an opportunity in exploring the uncertainties that you might be feeling. And taking that learning approach, that slightly lighthearted approach of like, I don't really know where I'm going, but I'm going to just see and play around with it, again, on the margins, right? I'm not saying make a precipitous decision and, sort of quit your jobs or, do anything rash, but it's having that open-minded approach. So again, when I was at LBS, I didn't know, once I decided I didn't want to be a consultant or work for anybody else, all I knew was I wanted to work for myself. And that meant I would have to start a business. But I didn't know what that looked like. And so I spent the next sort of year and a half experimenting. I came up with different ideas. I created different pitches. I submitted businesses to various different business competitions, and I just played around and experimented, again, on the margins. Didn't go, 100% all in on anything until I found the right fit. But I had an open-minded approach to trial and error. And so often, sometimes it's more as we realize what we don't like and what we don't want, that's what sort of uncovers the things that we do actively want. So just take a slightly, like I said, an experimental and a learning approach to, what comes next and how you're going to experiment to get there. And it's all around this sort of attitude of let's see, right? Let's just see what happens. So one business idea I had was around reclaiming reclaiming toiletries that are confiscated at airport security and donating them to homeless shelters and women's shelters, because it was a huge amount of waste being created, for example, and there was a huge need that was being unmet. And so that let's see attitude was like, let's see if there's anything in this, right? And at the time, this is back, like I said, in 2012, that exploration led to a dead end because there were all of these sort of weird regulations, at least here in the UK, that I sort of, in my initial research, met up against. And I was like, well, actually, this is not going to be my fight. I could overcome these and I could circumvent them, but this isn't going to be the thing that I sort of, stake my all on. But I didn't be like, oh no, well, this means that this one idea didn't work. I should never start another business. It was, okay, what next, right? So having that sort of slightly lighthearted approach. Similarly with, careers, you can experiment and have a job and realize you hate it. It doesn't mean that you're never going to be happy in a job again. It just means that specific job isn't the right one. So try a different one, or maybe a different role in the same company, or a lateral move to a slightly smaller company, or whatever it is. But everything doesn't have to be the be all end all of anything. You can always change, and you can always learn from every element of whatever the experiment looks like for you. And having a very curious approach, as opposed to criticizing yourself for everything that might go wrong or does go wrong, and just saying, well, why did it go wrong? What could I do differently? Again, that idea of, well, what about those other 2 points? What could I have done differently that would have led to a different outcome? And this is I would say, probably one of the most important sort of tangible things that I find helps with the discomfort and the anxiety that comes from big change or considering big changes, is quite literally playing out the worst case scenario to the very end. Because so often when people stop themselves from doing something or making a change that they want to change or whatever it is, it's because they have some big sort of sometimes amorphous fear around what it's going to look like if they took that plunge. So if you are, for example, considering changing a job or doing something totally different, but you're worried about it, play out that worst case scenario and make it very, very concrete. If you are worried that you're going to, move industries and you hate it, well, then what happens in that case? Okay, well, I moved industry and I hate it. So maybe I'll go back to the same industry I was in. Okay, well, if that happens, then what would be the worst case in that scenario? Well, you'd be back in the place where you started, but then you could, try a different move the next time around, and just play it down to its very, very logical worst case. And for most people, the absolute rock bottom worst case is being broke or ending up bankrupt somehow, and some sort of reputational damage, right? Or not having, just sort of losing face. But every single one of you, every single one of us can come back from that, right? The world is littered with people who have, for example, gone broke and then built their careers back up from scratch because they had the knowledge and they had sort of the attitude. The world is littered with people whose reputations may have been damaged a little bit, well, depending on what they've done, a lot, but you can claw yourself back. You're never going to do anything, that's totally without integrity. It's more about the pride that comes from failing, the pride that comes, or the hit to your pride that comes from failing or from trying to do something and it not working out. But you can recover from that. We all can recover from that. So again, what is the absolute worst thing that you are worried about that's holding you back? Play it out to the very end, and you will see, once you make that worst case scenario concrete and give it a name, a face, a number, whatever it means to you, you will find inevitably that you can survive even your worst imaginings. And if you don't think you can survive it, at least making it concrete then gives you something to grapple with. Then you can say, okay, well, if the worst case scenario is I apply for this job and I don't get it, and then I'm back at square one, well, what can I do then, right? you can name the problem and then you can come up with solutions for the problem. But keeping this vague amorphous fear in your head doesn't help you in any way. And so, like I said, make it concrete and play it out to the very end. And then start experimenting. Again, the part of what we're talking about is, having this experimental approach. I think it all starts with understanding who you are. So first and foremost, what is your vision and ambition for what you do want and what you don't want? That's all of the things that you want to be, all of the things that you want to do, and all of the things that you want to have, right? Having material things are not evil. It's what we do to get them that is, is good or bad. But, what do you want to be, do, and have? And what you expect and need from that process or that career or that relationship or whatever it is. And be very, very crystal clear on what it is that you want. Do you want to be famous? Do you want to be, multimillionaire? Do you want to be the founder of a unicorn business? Do you want to become CEO of a company? Whatever it is, make it very, very crystal clear what it is that you want. But then, and this goes again back to that experimental approach, be somewhat agnostic, again, as long as it doesn't contradict your values or, make you do anything that's out of alignment with your integrity, about how it happens and when it happens. So from my own life, I can tell you, back when I had graduated from undergrad, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I was telling him at the time how I couldn't really explain it or put it into words, but I felt that there was something that I was meant to do that was going to be big. Now, that is the most useless feeling in the world, right? I felt I was meant to do something big, but I knew that. And that feeling never, ever left me from, I think I was 19 or 20 until, for the rest of my life thereafter. That feeling, that deep inner feeling that I was meant to do something big never left me. And people always thought because I like political science, oh, maybe you should run for office, or maybe you should, work in policy in some capacity or whatever it was. But that wasn't it for me. And the how it happened and when it happened, I could not have predicted. But I did all of these other little things, following things, following adventure, making decisions that were in alignment with my values and my ambitions and my goals. And now what has come to pass is the way I am doing something big, and this has only sort of become uncovered in the past few years, is through the writing that I'm doing and the speaking that I'm doing around the world. Now, I could never in a million years have told you that it was going to be through books and through speaking events and conferences and things like that, that I would sort of have scratched that itch that I felt that I had, because we don't always know how it's going to happen. So being open-minded and exploring and acknowledging the opportunities when they come our way, that is really, really important, because we can't always decide this exact specifics in the make and the model or whatever of our ambitions. But if you know the what, you'll find your way to the how. And it's then having the patience about the when, that's the hardest part, because many of us, I will put my hand up, are so impatient. We want overnight success. We want things to fall into place. And I will tell you that the success and the fulfillment that I feel now has quite literally been a lifelong process. And so sometimes, the way I like to put it is that success at anything takes time, and sadly, it takes its own time. So as much as we would like for things to happen overnight and really quickly, that's not always within our control. So be somewhat agnostic about how the thing happens and when it happens for you, because it will eventually happen as long as you don't give up. And then follow the lead. So understanding, again, analyzing yourself, what you care about, what's important to you, and then following the leads. For me, it started as something as small as just, speaking at free events that they were doing for other people who were starting out in real estate. And I just found that I loved sharing my experiences, talking to people about what I was learning, and that dynamic of the question and answer and all that great stuff. It wasn't like I knew, okay, well, I'm going to start speaking at this group, and then it's going to lead to me speaking at this group. And there was no plan there, but I followed the leads as they came, as they sort of appeared to me. And you see what you want to see, so start looking, right? So it's that thing of, I don't know, if you buy a red car, all of a sudden, all you see are red cars everywhere on the road. They were all there before, but now because you're primed to see them, you're noticing them everywhere. Opportunities are exactly the same. Yes, in many of the countries that we live in, we're going through uncertain times, and people keep talking about recession, et cetera, but opportunities, if you want to find opportunities, then you have to look for opportunities, as opposed to telling yourself that there are none out there. If you want to make a lateral move, if you want to make a change, if you want to do anything, you will find those things if you look for those things. But you will never find those things if you keep telling yourself that they're not out there. So start looking for what you do want, instead of focusing all of your attention and energy on what you don't want. And then put yourself out there. And by this, I quite literally mean put yourself out there. So if you want to make a change or have this big goal or dream, and again, it could be personal or professional. If you want to, run a marathon, put yourself out there amongst running groups, ask people for advice. You will be amazed at how generous people are once you start asking. Similarly, in a professional environment, start planting seeds and asking people in your network, in the Chicago community network. I mean, we're part of this amazing global community of high achievers and wonderful people. Use it, because you never know where the next lead, the next fulfilling role, the next great opportunity is going to come from. So just start planting seeds everywhere you possibly can. And it's something as little as, literally tell everybody if you are, for example, looking for a new job, etc. You think everybody in your life knows what you care about and knows what's going on in your head, but that's not always the case. And you don't always know the connections that the people in your life will have. So, for example, many years ago, when I previously had written a book, I just asked everyone in my immediate circle, friends, family, etc., do you know anyone in publishing or who has been a published author? And quite literally, about 10 or 15 different leads came back to me from just my friends and family. And here I was thinking, I know who everybody knows, I know who all my friends are, but I didn't. I had close friends who were best friends with best-selling authors. And I would never have been able to guess that if I hadn't asked the question. So whatever it is you're looking for, whether it's a contact, it's an opportunity, whatever it is, ask everyone. I mean, maybe not in your immediate job. If you're looking to leave, that's maybe not the best place to do it, but just put yourself out there and let yourself be pleasantly surprised. So just very quickly, we won't have time to do a lot of this in the moment, but I want you to start thinking about your story. What do you care about? What do you want your life and your career to look like? So just ask yourself, and you can take a screenshot of this if it helps. But what do you want? What does your ideal day look like? How are you allocating your time? What are you doing to stimulate your brain and to feel like you're contributing to the world? What kinds of people are you spending time with? What are you doing and what are you not doing? What does the ideal look like for you? And then bigger picture, what is the ideal lifestyle? Where are you living? How often are you working? What do you own? What are you, what kinds of challenges are you grappling with? What kinds of problems are you trying to solve? What is the bigger picture? And then lastly, what do you want your ideal legacy to be? When you look back 30, 40, 50 years, whatever it is from now, and think back on your life, what will you look back on and think, wow, that was what made a really great life? These are the questions that we don't often stop and ask ourselves. And it's not as simple as just doing this exercise once. There's a whole process for thinking about very deeply and very concretely about what our ideals look like. And then thinking again, very concretely, how we can build that ideal into our lives now. Not wholesale overhaul, small little incremental changes, but how can we do it now? So when I did this exercise for myself the first time many years ago, one of the things that came out in my ideal day, my ideal lifestyle, and in sort of the legacy side of things was writing. For me, the power of words and written communication has always been so, so important. I love books. I love to read. I've always loved to write. And so instead of it being, oh, well, when I retire, once I hit a certain, income level, or once I hit a certain age, or once everything is perfect and the stars are all aligned, then I'll start to write. I didn't do that. Because if it's something that is in my ideal and it really means something to me, I need to find a way to do it every day. There's that great quote, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And so I needed to, and all of us need to find ways to bring, even in a small way, the things that make our lives lively and worth living into the now. So for me, that meant writing. First, it was just writing a blog about what I was doing while I was building my business. And nobody saw it. It wasn't published. It was nothing. It was just for the sheer joy of writing. And I captured some of the struggles, some of the funny things, all of, the frustrations, all of that stuff. But I found a way to weave it into my day-to-day life, even when I had no excuse or no way to monetize it or no sort of justification for doing it. The fact that I love to write was justification enough. So for you, whether that's running or playing the piano or going to visit an art gallery, you don't have to do it every day for hours on end. You shouldn't be all or nothing about it. But can you carve out 15 minutes before you go to work? Or, I don't know, 2 hours every weekend? Don't know. But once you start thinking about what makes up your ideal life, it's on you, because nobody else is going to give you permission. It's on you to figure out how you're going to fit it in and start doing it in small incremental ways. And then you have to be ready to experiment and learn from that. So for me, again, using that writing example, I started experimenting with just writing for myself. And then I found that actually some of the things that I was writing about, other people were asking me when I was speaking at events or I was doing sort of informal mentoring. So then I thought, you know what, maybe I'll publish this. And then maybe I'll publish it as a newsletter. And then more people started reading it. And then it evolved and it went from there into, instead of just talking about real estate and property, into just general leadership and mindset. And then eventually, many years down the line, almost 8 years after I started writing that first blog that nobody had read because I wasn't publishing it, 8 years later, it's now a book, and not, the same content, but that process of evolution and experimentation led to a published book. I couldn't have at that moment predicted that that's where it was going to go, but it was only because I had weaved what mattered to me in writing into my day-to-day life that it led to something else later down the line. And the same is true for you. It doesn't mean you're going to, practicing ballet for 20 minutes a day is going to mean that you can then become a prima ballerina in 10 years time. But just the sheer fact of doing it, you never know. You might start taking a class and you'll meet some people and then they'll take you down they'll challenge you in a new way, or they'll open up another opportunity to you, or whatever. Even if it goes nowhere, I think just doing it for the sheer fulfillment it gives you is enough of a justification. But if you need another reason to do the things that are important to you, it might lead to something even more meaningful and even bigger. You just don't know. And then thinking about, so bridging the gap from, okay, well, these are the ideals that I really want to create for my life, but how do I get there? Well, first and foremost, again, it goes back to, instead of obsessing over how it's impossible, oh, well, I don't have any time, or I don't have any energy, or, okay, that's might be what it is. But again, you can control your life to a large extent, right? There are some things that you have, other people need to get involved in. But instead of obsessing over the problem and the challenges and how it's impossible, flip that on its head and stop telling yourself what's impossible and just ask yourself the question, well, how could I do this thing? How could I start writing 20 minutes a day? Where could I find that time? And all of a sudden it goes from a closed fact and this sort of definitive thing, well, it's impossible, I can't do it, to all of a sudden being this open-ended possibility that stimulates the creative side of your brain. And you will find solutions coming, and they might be crazy, some might be more relevant, but it's by asking the right questions. So instead of closing yourself off, ask the right questions and study the art of the possible instead of admiring what's impossible. How could you do that thing? How could you make that career change? How could you, I don't know, sort of stop being friends with the people who are draining you? How could you move to the country you've always wanted to live in? There's also what I like to refer to as tactical ignorance. Now, this is not burying your head in the sand and ignoring negative information. This is about being, again, very careful and conscious about the inputs you let in and all of the inputs that you keep out. About curating the stuff that you're letting into your life, the people, the ideas, the energy, all of that great stuff, and being very careful about and tactical about all of the things that you're ignoring that is just noise. Again, all of the stuff other people are telling you should be doing, you should care about, you should want, all of that stuff. That's just noise. Making the important things happen. And that can happen, again, that's sort of been bridging the gap between your ideals and where you are now. One of the best ways that I have found for making those important things, those things that are important to you, that make you feel alive, that make you feel like, oh man, I'm really sort of doing, what I want to be doing kind of thing. That can happen as you start learning more about what your natural rhythms are over the course of your day or your week. Many of us have what I like to refer to as golden hours in a day, where we're, sort of more creatively awake, or we have more energy. For some people, that's the morning. Some people, that's later afternoon. Some people, that's the night. whatever it is for you. I have found for me, I am the most creative and sort of calm, but sort of creatively energetic between the hours of 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. So if my young children mean it so that I'm awake during those times, that's not when I'm checking email. That's not when I'm doing admin or looking at my P&Ls or balance sheets. Those golden hours when I'm most creatively on fire is when I'm doing my creative work. So start again, analyzing yourself. When is it that you are most creatively on fire, most strategically on fire, whatever it is that you want to build or grow or change for your own self? And then use that time for that thing. Don't use it for email. Don't use it to get admin off your table or off your desk or whatever it is. Your golden hours are golden. So use them for the golden things that make, that you really, really want to focus on. And I've shared this earlier, but saying no to say yes, getting better about all of the things you say no to, so you can say yes to more of the things that you care about. Now, we don't have time for this guided reflection because I want to get to some questions. But what I will do is there's this really powerful guided reflection that helps you start tuning into your values and your intuition and the answers that you already have about how you're going to get to where you want to get. So I'll share that recording of that reflection that I've created. I'll share it with Natalie so she can share it with all of you. But I just want you guys to all remember that your next move, whatever it is, whether again, it's in your personal life, your professional life, your health, whatever, it doesn't have to be anything more than just your next move. So if it works out and it's all great, great. If it's not, and you realize the experiment failed in that instance, equally great. Do a different experiment and just keep moving on. Don't make it mean anything more than just the stepping stone to the next thing. Your career is not who you are. And this is really hard because we are all high achievers. We've gone to amazing institutions like Chicago and other probably Ivy Leagues or the equivalent and worked at the equivalent of organizations, but it's not who you are. It takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And this again goes back to that idea of, you can know the what you want, but how you get there and when you get there is oftentimes out of your control. So just be patient. As long as you're continuing to go in the direction that you want and doing big and small things to make your goals, your visions, your ambitions a reality, don't worry about how long it takes you to get there, because the time is going to pass anyway, right? Whether it takes 10 years or 20 years, doesn't matter. Those 20 years will pass anyway. Be thankful for the things that don't happen. I found that so often we get consumed with, oh, that didn't work out. I didn't get that job, or I get rejected for this thing or that promotion. But usually, not always, usually it's for the best. So just be thankful and move on. And stay open. Like I said, sometimes we get things that happen to us that doesn't make sense until sort of we make sense of it, a few years down the line. But just stay open to where the opportunities and the interesting ideas, and again, the ways that you can fulfill your ambitions, where they come from and how it happens. But all of this will take a lot of really hard inner work, having those tough conversations with yourself. What are your values? What do you care about? Where are you living in alignment with those things? And where are you perhaps subscribing to somebody else's sort of version of what success should look like? But it's all worth it, because that is how you design a life and a career that's important to you, not by listening to other people, not by letting in lots of noise and nonsense, by you focusing on you and tuning in to you. So with that, I see we've already got some questions, but I will stop my screen share and then just take both live as well as some of the questions that have come in already. So Natalie, I'll leave it over. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you guys. And please, we'll stay a few minutes here. We'll stay a few minutes late and we'll ask some questions. So please submit them to the chat. The first one that I think kind of really helpfully talked at the beginning about getting your MBA. So how did your MBA specifically help you start your business? Did you feel it was necessary, or was it kind of a mental change to be like, I'm leaving this past, the CIA and the public life behind, and entering the private sector? How helpful was your MBA in starting your business?
I think it was twofold. It was, as you said very rightly, it was that mental shift for me personally to feel like, okay, well, now I can take myself seriously as a business person because I've got this basic foundational grounding. I mean, clearly, it to be honest, those of you who have MBAs, it actually doesn't really mean very much, because like all experience and qualification, it comes from actual experience and on-the-job training, right? But the degree is useful for something. But yes, it had that internal sort of effect, but it also meant that other people would take me more seriously, right? So eventually, once I had a bit of a track record, and then I started going out to potential investors, I think it was reassuring to them. It wasn't necessary, but it was, I think, reassuring to them that I did have this sort of stamp of approval. And then thirdly, the sort of the open secret about MBAs is that the best thing about them is not actually the education, it's the network. And so from that perspective, the LBS network and all sort of, alumni networks are worth their weight, are worth the investment you make for, that education alone, but as long as you use it. And I have found that to be the case, that both in growing my various businesses, but also in getting advice and support and help and all of that great stuff, the LBS network was worth those 2 years that I invested at the school alone.
Amazing. And then I think another question, talking about sort of joining a new company or moving, maybe even starting your own company, how do you find what were the skills you found most effective to assess a cultural fit with a new company or leader? How do you know if you're in the right place? Maybe you're in the right industry, but not the right location in that industry. How do you assess that, sort of if you're in the right place, I guess, for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's one of those intangible things where you really have to tune in to yourself, because sometimes you'll feel uncomfortable and there's like a tension just because something is a new environment or you're sort of out of your comfort zone. But sometimes the reason you feel that tension or that awkwardness is because the person you're working under is, maybe misaligned with your values, or the industry is. And so I would say, again, take that time to ask those hard questions. Ask yourself, like, what is it about this situation? If I do feel a bit awkward, or there's a bit of tension, or whatever it feels like, or sometimes it's just that spidey sense, right? Like you can't put a name to it, but you just sort of feel it in your bones or in your guts, that there's something off here. So then investigate it. Don't just leave it as this weird amorphous feeling. Investigate it. Why do I think that? Is there any evidence to support why I feel this way? And then once you've got a little bit of information, it doesn't have to be a long drawn out process, but then you can decide, okay, well, actually it is just this leader. And maybe if I start then doing sort of reaching out to people in a different part of the business, and then I can see and sort of test it in a different area. And maybe it is just this person I'm working under isn't the right fit, but another part of the business. But there's only so much you can do in theory and sort of as an intellectual exercise. You actually have to go and spend time in that business, in that, under that leader, whatever it is. And so acknowledging that sometimes if you do make that step, there is not necessarily an opportunity to go back, but then at least from experience, and then you can make an informed decision and say, actually, this whole organization is full of leaders who are a certain way because that's how they value leadership or how they define leadership. And then it's a question of, okay, well, let me try another company in the same industry. And then if you find it's the same problem there, well, then again, it's starting to create a useful data set that you can then say, well, maybe this is the wrong industry for me. But it comes first and foremost from doing the analysis, but then also putting yourself in that environment so you can experience it.
Awesome. Yeah, back to that analytical sort of experimentation. I think another question that followed down that path is, what are some tools and practices that you have to get to know yourself and your intuition better? Sometimes, especially at Chicago, everyone here is trained to be super analytical and super like data driven, but how do you kind of ignore that part of your brain and follow your intuition sometimes, even if it doesn't seem like the path of least resistance?
Yeah. Well, two things. One, for those of us who need sort of justification, there's a great quote from Einstein that says something like, intuition is the guide, and I think analysis is the servant, but we've flipped it around. I'm totally butchering that quote, but basically there's an Einstein quote about it. So if you need someone else to say it, you're right. Intuition is actually something that smart people, we just learn to unlearn. So again, the thing, and it's a shame that we ran out of time, because I will send you guys that guided reflection, which is about tuning into your intuition and having those conversations with yourself to bring it out. But other things is like, again, having that, giving yourself that reflective time. So, when you're just by yourself, it's just you, and no noise, no distractions, no computers, no phones, and giving yourself, even if it's just 30 minutes once a week, or whatever you can make time for, and asking yourself those questions that you might normally go and ask somebody else. So again, whether it's, is this the right career for me? Should I don't know, marry this person? Should I apply for this job? In the day-to-day hectic pace of life, we'll just go for the easiest or lowest hanging fruit answer, which is usually, either to say no without justification or to say yes without justification. So give yourself whatever the questions are that you are grappling with, or you think that you want to answer in a more meaningful way. Give yourself time with yourself, by yourself. And it's a little bit awkward at first if you're not used to it, literally just sitting with a question and yourself in a room or wherever, and a notebook. But take a notebook, a journal, whatever works for you, and close yourself off to everybody else, and then ask yourself those questions, and then just see what comes up. It doesn't mean that you're going to get gold every single time and you're going to answer the question the first time around, but it's just that practice of engaging with your inner voice as opposed to everybody else around you and asking other people for advice. So I would say just practice. Ask, if you need a question to get you started, to start digging into your intuition, I would say, start with something big, like, what do I care about? Or what are my values? Or what do I want my legacy to be? Something big. And then just to start, break the inertia and get the momentum going, but give yourself time away from all distractions to do. You can't do it while you're commuting. You can't do it, sort of during your lunch break while you're, forcing food down in 20 minutes. Give yourself a good 30 minutes. I would say ideally 60 minutes if you can do it, to just sit with yourself, somewhere quiet, somewhere without distractions, and just then, like I said, ask yourself a single question, not a whole barrage of questions, and just spend your time answering that one question, and then do it again with the next one and the next one and the next one. And over time, you'll start to develop, a stronger instinct and a stronger intuition, because this is a muscle or a brain, is sort of part of our brains that we've just let lie dormant. So before you go asking other people or the internet or a book, ask yourself first, but do it. Give yourself the time to do it in a protected space.
Amazing. And I think we'll go with one final one before we head out for the afternoon, or evening for you. What advice do you have for those that have financial barriers when making this career change? You talked about having to say no to a lot of fun stuff to save your pennies and put it all towards your life and your career. What is your advice for people who are in a similar situation and need to, want to make a change, but aren't sure financially how it'll work for them?
Okay, I guess for me, this depends on your risk appetite. So everybody has a different approach to things. So the financial barriers being, you don't have enough of a savings account to fall back on if you want to change your career. So I would say do everything you possibly can to build up that fallback plan. Now, it can be literally things like, maybe lowering your costs. So can you move somewhere cheaper where the rent is cheaper? Can you, get rid of subscriptions that you never use? I mean, quite literally almost treat it like a P&L exercise and look at all of your outgoings and all of your incomings and slash and burn through all of the fat, as it were, if there is any in your life, is one way of doing it, sort of creating a bit more of a cushion. And then secondly, I'm not overly idealistic and sort of naive. Like sometimes you just have to suck it up for a little while and work in a job or something that is going to pay you while you are building up a savings war chest, so then you can eventually leave. So view that as, if you hate your job, for example, and do want to change your career path, just view what you've currently got as a means to that end. It's not that the job is the end, it's that it's paying you and you can save every possible penny that you possibly can from your income from that job to then help you make that career change or that career path change. But similarly, also, what are the resources that you've got in your current situation that you might not have been using? So most companies have brilliant HR resources, will have some sort of training resources, will have, maybe even sabbatical opportunities. Just explore where you already are, the wealth of, and again, depending on your company and how big or small, this, there might be less resources or fewer, but literally use every single resource you can to start to help you towards that exploration. So maybe it's, having a confidential chat with somebody in HR, or maybe it's being paired with a mentor internally that you can have these frank conversations about making a career path. Maybe it's taking advantage of a training opportunity so you can upscale for the change that you want to make in the career that you do eventually want to have. But use the current assets you already have and use every possible aspect of them that you can. And then once you've got, whether it's the skills or the contacts or the network or the savings sort of cushion, then you can start making that transition and making the career path. But I would say, again, don't be black or white about it. It doesn't mean like you have to love everything that you're doing and everything is amazing and all sort of bunnies and sunshine, or everything is terribly horrible. Like, if you're not happy with where you're at, try to find ways that will give you something for where you want to go. And sometimes that's just the paycheck, sadly, but other times you can, call on other resources.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Rupal. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. I am going to drop again Rupal's website in the chat, and I will send it out in the follow-up email as well. So you guys all have access to her and her resources, and hopefully her book coming out in May here in the US.
Yes. If I could make a plea, I mean, if anybody is interested in getting my book, pre-orders make a huge difference for authors. So you can pre-order it by Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever. So please, if you're interested, I mean, you don't have to, but if you are interested, please pre-order. And then secondly, via my website or LinkedIn, if you guys have any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask and you want to connect with me separately, please, you're very, very welcome to. I love engaging with other alums, and I'm very happy to have a chat one-on-one if that would be helpful. So let's do that.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you all for joining us. I'm also putting our website to our career events here at UChicago in the chat. We have a lot of great ones coming up. Next week, a session on overcoming your imposter syndrome, a networking night for consultants and consulting, alumni and consulting. But thank you again for joining us. There's going to be a survey that pops up at the end here. Please feel free to fill it out, give us some feedback. It really helps us create great events here. And thank you all. Thank you again, Rupal, and we will see you all soon.